Usually it involves e6, d5, c5, and the knights out to c6 and f6, their natural squares. Quite often white will take on d5 then, and after e takes we've got the Tarrasch, or after knight takes we got the semi-Tarrasch. Yeah, let's make some moves to illustrate. We will start with the Tarrasch first and then look at the semi-Tarrasch. So the move order that could happen is this, like this, and now c5. Black also can play bishop e7 first, then castle, then go c5. I mean, we cannot prevent those moves. And the order in which they are played is totally flexible. For black, you can even start with 1 c5 and then play e6 d5. Not much we can do about it. So we're going to take, and after e takes we got the Tarrasch. After knight takes, that would be the semi-Tarrasch. Okay, this is the second part of this video. So e takes, and we go d4, grab space in the center. In almost all cases, those pawns will trade against one another, and then we have an isolated queen pawn position, which is very typical for the Tarrasch. Here he has a couple of moves. Knight c6 and bishop e7 usually lead to the same thing, the main line. c4 sometimes is played, but I think white with the timely b3 will get an edge. Yeah, this kind of structure, the d pawn is weak and white has play on the queen side. We can look quickly at a game here that was played with this. b5 was a mistake, and after this white won a pawn in Elvest Kovalyov. Yeah, c4 can be an option sometimes for black, but usually this is played when there's either the chance to pin a knight on c3, and well, white needs to have a king on e1 for that to be affected in the first place, or they play this after bishop g5, and we never put the bishop on g5 in our lines. So going back to this position, knight c6 or bishop e7, they both will probably lead to the same position, as both are played anyway. Here black of course can do some different things. He could take on d4, but this is a bit premature. Now we've gotten a nice blockade against the IQP, and after bishop e7 we even have a nice choice. Knight c3 we can play, and after castles we can go b3, which would transpose to our chosen main line, however in a pretty inaccurate version for black. Or also bishop e3 is a traditional move that is better for white. We are, by the way, somewhat committed to playing b3 in the main line position. What am I talking about? Bishop e7, let's say here, knight c3, castles, c4 again is answered by b3, castles, b3. This is our repertoire choice, and we are basically forced to do this. The reason is that there is a line where we play an early b3, and then we are committed to that setup. This is not a problem, it's a perfectly respectable line, but there is some commitment there. What is this line I'm talking about? We should maybe check this out briefly. I'm talking about this, bishop e7, we castle, and now b3 is my suggestion. After c5 takes d4, we would get the Tarrasch, knight c6, knight c3, and we are committed to this move. Again, not the end of the world, but it's a certain commitment. More popular moves here are bishop g5 or dc5. b3 is interesting though. What is black doing now after b3? The most interesting and probably complicated move is the move knight to e4. I think it's also the best move. Simply taking on d4 doesn't usually do the trick. For example, like rook e8, bishop b2, and now c takes d4. White is in very good control here. He has a nice knight on d4 that is going to be supported by the bishop and pressure on the pawn. It's a good anti-IQP position. After bishop c5 here, we just take and set up a blockade of the c5 square. White is comfortably better here. A somewhat better move on move 9 is bishop g4. This is a bit more active. White can take and fianchetto the bishop. Again, I believe that white is a bit better here. We can look at some moves. a6 is an option. Black tries to get a good square there on a7, and we play h3, and now e3. This is a typical continuation. The idea is to play knight to e2, increase the control over f4, or play knight f4. Rook e8, knight e2, knight e4, knight f4, and white has gained the bishop pair for a nice position. At least the slight edge. This is probably a little bit more even. I can also go rook e8, and after rook c1 drop back to f8. Here we play in a similar way, h3 and e3. White is at least slightly better in this. We can look at a forced line here, knight e4. Oops, we can take and get into this ending, which is very one-sided. White is just slightly better, and black has no chances for any active play. In any way, it's just very, very one-sided. Alternatively, if we jump back, knight b5 is also a good move. In general, those positions are, I think, pretty easy to play. We go for this blockade, and we have very good piece placement in this position. Knight b5, knight e4, knight bd4, for example, was a game between Anish Giri and Robin Swinkels, Amsterdam 2012. A simple to play position, as I said. In this position here on move 9, black's best bet is the move knight e4. This is more enterprising. We go bishop b2 and cover this, and now bishop f6. This is the move that increases the pressure on white center. Here I originally intended to recommend the move knight a4, and I believe it is very interesting, and also it's very, very testing. The black player really needs to know detailed theory here to equalize or get close to equality. However, the problem is that this is extremely complicated. Black usually goes b6 here or rook e8, and it's going to be very sharp with bishop a6 coming, rook e8. It's purely tactical for a long time. I looked at this. I think white has very decent chances there, and also, as I said, black has to be super precise. My problem is just that it would take like half an hour just to look at this. I mean, probably longer, and I don't feel this is very appropriate for a video series like this. If you want this complicated position, give it a go. It's very interesting. I mean, analyze it before and not just play it. As a practical suggestion, I'm going to go for a different move. I'm going to suggest knight takes e4. This is not as sharp, but definitely more manageable. Black takes, knight d2, and now it's not so easy for black to prove full equality. The normal looking move, bishop d4, is, I think, not fully equal. Bishop takes and pawn takes. Knight takes d4 is not so great. We go e3 and take this. A coming queen to d6 or knight to d6 is very nice here. So c takes. Now we take on e4, and here we get a fairly standard position for the Tarrasch. The idea now for white is to put queen on d2, rook on c1, often rook on e1, and then put a knight on c5 with slight but annoying pressure. For example, rook e8, oops, that was a misclick, rook e8, queen d2, bishop f5, knight c5, queen e7, rook c1. This was a game between Tal and Pachman, Sarajevo, 1966. White has a slight advantage. A very similar development is like this: queen e7, rook c1, bishop g4, rook e1. We often need some protection of this pawn. Rook c1, queen d2, and again knight c5 is coming up. This is a very risk-free position where white can try forever to play against black's weakened structure. A move that also sometimes comes into consideration here is queen to g5, just trading queens. An ending is slightly better for white here. It's not a lot, but it is something. Another option for black here is the move e3, but it seems to fail. We take, black takes here, and now bishop takes c6 is crude but strong after the capture. Knight e4. White is better. He will win a pawn, for example, after bishop g5, queen takes d4. A central pawn got lost. e3 doesn't seem to be good at all. Probably the best move here is bishop g4, which is not at all intuitive or easy to play. And still I think white can try a little bit here. We will take on e4, bishop takes, and now f3. The bishop moves, and e3. We're kicking this knight away. Then upcoming transformation is the best line. But still, I'm not totally sure that black has equalized here. He still is a pawn down, and he does not super easily get it back. We can still try to do something in this position. It's a very safe choice, but I think it's not a bad choice in an economical way. You don't get the Tarrasch so often, but you should have something prepared that you know and that is safe. If you feel like this is too little, then you can investigate knight a4 more, in more detail. I think it's very interesting, and I think probably quite promising to study it, because this is not in fashion at all. And if you know it well, I think you have good chances to score. I just felt it's inappropriate for our series. It's just a bit too complicated. That was the Tarrasch. Now the semi-Tarrasch. The semi-Tarrasch actually comes in two versions. The first version is when a knight is on c3. The second one is without a knight on c3. We will get the version without the knight on c3 in almost all cases. I'm talking about this here. c5 takes and knight takes. Here there is no knight on c3, and this is in fact quite helpful for white. With a knight on c3, black can often simplify his task by trading. Here, after castles and knight c6 now is the normal move. Bishop e7 comes to the same thing. I think black cannot equalize. Let's have a look. Bishop e7, d4, and now castles or c takes d4. A position like that, white always dominates because of his bishop. It's just slightly better for him. Castles is the normal move, and then we take on c5, and after bishop c5 we play the move a3. The idea is always to expand with b4, bishop b2, queen b3, rook d1, this kind of thing. Black's position is absolutely not great. If he stops this with a5, we get a nice position like this. b5 is just weak. White has more space. It doesn't look good. If black allows b4, we get a position like this. Bishop e7, bishop b2, bishop f6, and then queen to b3. And again, rook d1, e4. White is just better. Yeah, as I said, the semi-Tarrasch without knights on a knight on c3 is not particularly great for black. Let's look at a different approach. This, d4, and now other moves. Black has tried some other moves. Bishop e7, d takes c5 leads to things that we discussed already, but black also has tried to take. But after knight takes, bishop d7, e4, knight f6, knight c3, white had a standard position that is, of course, a bit better. Yeah, more space and the better development. Black also tried to move his knight again, putting some pressure on this pawn. Here, in both cases actually, I recommend a no-nonsense approach that will net a slight edge. Just take this. The upcoming ending is typical for Catalan structures. The bishop is very strong, and we get ideas in with knight g5, potentially knight e4 to d6. Something like this is just pretty awkward for Black to play. There's just pressure on Black's position. He has no active play. The move knight to b6 is very similar in nature. We will also take and play this type of ending where white is just more comfortable. Something like this, and now knight d2, intending queenside action, is just better for white. Yeah, the semi-Tarrasch, as I said, without the knight on c3 is not particularly dangerous, and in many cases normal moves lead to at least a slight advantage for white. There is also the semi-Tarrasch with the knight on c3. In fact, in our repertoire, we very rarely play an early knight c3 in situations where there's a pawn on e6 and a pawn can come to d5. There is only, if I'm not mistaken, one specific move order that could get us into the semi-Tarrasch with a knight on c3. So it's not the most important ever, but I'm still going to show it because, well, it cannot hurt to know something against it. You never know how you might get it. This is the move order I'm talking about. Specifically this. The two knights here. Knight to c3. I don't recommend in our repertoire knight f3 because Black has options like g6 or e5. It's outside of our coverage. So knight c3. And now Black can play e6. The move e4 is no good due to d5, so we go knight f3 and d5, and now we've got it, the semi-Tarrasch with a knight on c3. Not a big deal, but needs to be checked. So castles, bishop e7, and now my recommendation is just to take on d5. White also has d4, and then like this, and e4. This is a bit sharper, maybe also a little bit more dangerous, but it's too complicated for such a super rare line. So I recommend just take on d5, keep it simple. Black recaptures with the pawn. Queen takes can be answered with slow moves, but also with the very powerful d4, after which cd4 fails to knight d4. It's very good for white. And knight d4 we can answer with this sequence, which gives white a great position there with a fantastic bishop on e4. Very obscure stuff. Yeah, Black takes with the pawn and we go d4. So this is the semi-Tarrasch. It looks like a regular Tarrasch, but c3 and f6 are off the board. I looked at a couple of things here and ultimately went with the classical, the traditional main line, which is d takes c5, Black takes, and bishop to g5. I checked some other continuation, but I think this is still probably the most promising. The queen is attacked and Black has to do something about it. The move f6 is the move that was played a lot in the 60s, 70s, early 80s. White, however, gets a slight edge here with no problems. He puts the bishop on c3 and puts up a blockade on d4. Like this, white is a bit better. Weakness, weakness, and good control on d4. f6 is not very bothersome. So queen to b6 is an alternative. We go rook c1, and now Black has to do something about this pawn. Yeah, he can cover it or try to cover it, but this is not great. Tempo, knight g5, and white is a lot better. Yeah, the move queen b6 is a bit questionable. We very often will gain important time on it. The move d4 is a little bit better, but this opens up the c4 square for us, and it will net us the bishop pair with a good position. At the end, it comes to one thing. After bishop g5, the only move that seems to give black decent chances is the move queen to d7, which is not particularly intuitive. The idea of this is sometimes also to play here with a tempo on the bishop if the knight has moved. And this is indeed my suggestion, move the knight. I want to go to e1. The knight is often well placed on d3, it looks at a critical square on c5, and sometimes we can also go to f4. Yeah, for example here we have rook e8, knight d3, bishop back, and bishop d2, intending this. Yeah, here there is a line that we can check with knight d5, bishop h3, little tactical idea, but at the end white just has the bishop pair for not much. d4 is the other principal choice. The knight goes to the square, and a4 now, bishop d2, b4. This is white's idea. Play on the queen side and use this knight on d3 potentially to jump to c5 after a subsequent rook c1. Here white was a bit better in Topalov, Kurt Hansen, Istanbul 2000. Yeah, the Tarrasch and semi-Tarrasch you won't get that often. But the thing is, you cannot avoid it. Absolutely not. There is no meaningful way, at least, to do it if once you opt for something that is not 1e4. So it makes sense to have something available. The semi-Tarrasch with knight c3 is very rare in our repertoire. Still now you have an idea what to do. The semi-Tarrasch without